9.5. This is where we're going to have word problems or application problems, which are going to create quadratic equations in our process for solving. We'll start out with some baby steps here. The product of two consecutive even whole numbers is 840. Find the two numbers. Okay, so we need to put in some variables here. My first number, that first even number, we're going to call it just plain old x. Now, to be consecutive, it means it has to be the very next even number. So, for example, if my first number was 2, the next even number would be 4. If my first even number was 8, my next even number would be 10. I'm always adding 2 to the next even number. So my second even number will be represented as x plus 2. Since we're trying to find the product, that means we want to multiply these two representations together. Is your equal sign, so we set it equal to 840. Distribute the x, and here comes your quadratic equation. Set this equal to 0, and now we need to factor. Okay, so we need two numbers that multiply to be 840 and subtract to be 2. Let's see, one of my numbers has to be end in a 0 because it's going to be a product which is ending in a 0. One of the shortcuts you could take is take your calculator and take the square root of 840, because that's going to be the same number multiplied by itself, and that will get us into the ballpark. So if I take the square root of 840 in my calculator, that gives me like 28.9. Now I said it has to end in a 0 because 840, so the closest number to 28.9 is 30. So then I go 840 divided by 30, I get 28. There's my two numbers. And 30 is the bigger number. It's going to be the plus sign. And so therefore it gets the plus, 28 gets the minus. We solve for x. Now it said the product of two consecutive even whole numbers. Whole numbers are always positive. So this answer that's a negative 30 is not going to count. So my first number is 28. Then 28 plus 2 more would be 30. So these are the two numbers. So watch for those restrictions here. If there's no restrictions on, it's got to be a whole number or positive or whatever. Then you would have two sets of answers. And I'll give you an example of that here in a second. All right, the difference of two positive numbers is 4, and the sum of their squares is 58. Find the two numbers. Okay, so the first number is going to be called x. Now here they didn't say anything about being consecutive, so I don't add anything to it. So I know nothing about my second number, so I'm going to call it y. I don't like to have to bring in two different variables, but sometimes we have to. And in this case, it's good because they give us two equations. The difference of the two positive numbers is 4, and the sum of their squares is 58. These are two equations here. So my first equation, we're just going to take the x minus the y and set it equal to 4. Now the sum means we're going to add, and the squares means we're going to have to square the x and square the y, and then add them together and say that's equal to 58. Okay, so again, if I have to work with two variables, you're going to have to come up with two equations, and I can see a quadratic happening here. Here's my x squared, but I don't want the y here. So what we're going to do is we're going to either, well, wait a minute, based on this equation, let's keep everybody positive. Let's add over the y. That way everybody stays positive here. And we're going to put y plus 4 into this x right here. And my quadratic equation is going to be based on y's, not x's. And that's perfectly okay. Nothing wrong with that. So we have a little work to do here. We're going to have to FOIL this out. Y times y is y squared. Y times 4 is 4y. 4 times y is another 4y. And 4 times 4 is 16. Plus that y squared equals 58. Okay, y squared over here added to this one, that's 2y squared, plus an 8y, plus my 16 equals 58. This is now my quadratic equation, which has to be set equal to 0, so I'm subtracting the 58 over. So let's see, 16 minus 58, how about a negative 42 sounds good. Wait a minute, all my terms are even numbers. So let's divide everybody by a 2. I like to work with smaller numbers. That's much easier to work with. And you can do that as long as every term is divisible by some value, you can divide it into everybody. So now this will be easier to factor. So let's think. I need two numbers that multiply to be 21. The only thing I can think of is 7 and 3. Subtract to be 4. Yep, 7 minus 3. So y plus 7, y minus 3 equals 0. Solve for y. Well, that's going to be a minus 7 because we just changed the, wait a minute, we had to have positive numbers. So the y equals negative 7. We're going to throw that out. So my first number, or my number for y, is 3. Okay. Then I'm going to put 3 in for y here to find my x. So 3 plus 4 is 7. So x is a 7 and the y is a 3. There's my two numbers. Now, if you want to double check, yes, 7 minus 3 equals 4. But 7 squared is 49. 3 squared is 9. And 49 plus 9 is 58. So it makes both stipulations true. I'm happy with that one. If the area of the rectangle is 136 centimeters squared, what is the length of the diagonal? Round your answer to 2 decimal places. Okay, now here's where we can run into some rounding error issues. So I am going to teach you how to let your calculator handle your values where you don't want to work with a rounded number, because then your rounding error gets too big. You type in the answer and it says it's wrong because of your rounding error. So the first thing I'm going to do here is we're going to build a rectangle. And we have to find the length of this diagonal, which is going to make a right triangle here for us. So what we need to do is find the length and the width. Once we have these two sides, we can perform the Pythagorean theorem to solve that diagonal. Okay, so the D is going to be my diagonal. L is going to be for the length down here. This will be the width. And again, it doesn't matter how you write it on the rectangle. It doesn't have to be drawn to scale. Just give yourself a picture of what's going on. Now here it says that the width of the rectangle is 2 less than twice its length. So we need to double the length and subtract the 2, and that's going to equal our width. So that's going to give me W is equal to 2 times the length L minus 2 will be my width. Now, they did tell us that the area of the rectangle is 136 centimeters squared, so length times width equals 136, but we really can't have an equation with two different variables in it. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the 2L minus 2, which is representing W, and replace it right here in my equation. Now what we're going to do is, now that we have just one variable, L, we're going to distribute this L and we're going to create ourselves a quadratic equation. So L times 2L is going to give me 2L squared. L times 2 is 2L equal to 136. We're going to subtract over the 136, so it's set equal to 0. And notice that all my terms on the left-hand side have a coefficient that's an even number. So I want to work with smaller numbers, so I'm going to divide every term by 2, including the 0. But that's not going to change. So I'll have L squared plus L minus 68 is equal to 0. Now, one way we're going to solve this is by completing the square. this does not factor. There are no two factors of 68 that subtract to be a 1. So what we're going to do is, since minus 68 is not allowing me to factor this, we're going to add it over to the other side. So it's a positive 68, and then we're going to go plus blank on each side, and we're going to complete the square where this is going to be a perfect square number, and that's going to make it easy for us to factor. So to find this number, you go to the middle term. This is 1L. We're going to take half of that 1, which is a half. We're going to square that on both sides. So 1/2 squared, 1/2 squared, that's going to be a 4th over here. So I go to my calculator, 68 plus 1/2 squared, return my answer as a fraction so you can see what buttons I pushed. In my calculator, 68 plus left parentheses, alpha y equals for the fraction. Move this up just a bit higher. 1, down arrow 2, get out of the fraction, close the parentheses, squared, then hit the math button and say you want to return my answer as a fraction. And there's the 273 over 4. So I'll bring the calculator back and forth here to show you the steps on how to enter it. Okay, so 273 over 4. Now this is what we consider a perfect square trinomial, where the first term and the last term are perfect squares. And if you take 1/2 plus 1/2, that gets you that middle term right here. So this factors to two binomials, L plus 1/2, L plus 1/2. But since they're both exactly the same, we're going to write it as one binomial squared. From here, we're going to take the square root of both sides. So that makes this 2 disappear as a power. This becomes plus or minus. We really can't take the square root of 273 because it's not a perfect square. So this is something, again, we're going to let the calculator work with. And the square root of 4 in the denominator is a 2. So I'm going to subtract over the 1/2, sneak that in front of that plus or minus, and now here's my answer. Now the one thing we have to agree is, because we got a plus or minus, we run the risk a lot of getting one positive number, one negative number. So I'm looking at this 273. Okay, so let's see. Square root of 100 is 10. And this is 273. So we're looking at a pretty good sized number here, which is definitely bigger than a half. So subtracting this fraction from a negative 1/2 is just going to give us a bigger or smaller negative, however you want to look at it. So we're only going to do the plus sign. So again, going to the calculator, I'm going to type in negative alpha y equals fraction 1/2. Get out of there, go plus alpha y equals, whoops, excuse me. I guess I didn't hit the alpha button. Get on, there we go. Alpha y equals our fraction second square root 273. We'll put a 2 on the bottom. But what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to store this for L. You see this arrow with the L? The arrow is this button right here, store. And I'm going to store it in for L. L is, let's see, where is it? Oh, there it is, right above this right parentheses. It's in green. So it's going to be the same color as your alpha button. So, okay, so alpha L, again, I apologize for my calculator crashing here. We're going to hit enter. That decimal is going to be stored, and we're going to leave it there. So we don't want to round it to 7.76 and use that number, because then we're going to lose this part of the value, so it's going to create our rounding error. All right, so that's how we store it. Again, there's your store button. All right, so then what we're going to do is we're going to come back over here, and we'll say that the length is 7.76 in case they want us to type it in. Now, to find W is 2L minus 2, so we're going to type that into the calculator. 2 alpha L minus 2 stored into the width. So again, hopefully my calculator won't crash here. So we're going 2 alpha L minus 2, store it, and alpha W. W is above the minus sign. That's going to give us 13.52271164. But again, if they do ask for just the W, we'll round it to 2 decimal places. Now, to find the diagonal, that's the length squared plus the width squared is equal to capital D squared. That's my Pythagorean theorem. Well, to solve for D is we take the square root of both sides, and then this is what we want to type into our calculator since we have those values stored. So it's going to look like this right here. So the button pushing that we're going to do, second x squared for the square root, alpha L squared plus alpha W squared, hit enter, and there's our answer, 15.59. There it is, rounded to 2 decimal places, and that's our length of our diameter in centimeters. All right, the next example that we're going to look at, the length of a rectangular park is 4 feet less than 3 times its width. If the area is 273 square feet, what are the dimensions? And again, round your answers to 1 decimal place. So I'm going to draw a rectangle, and the length is supposed to be 3 times its width, then minus 4. So 3W minus 4 is the length written in terms of W. Well, just like we saw up here, length times width was the area 136. Now we're going to go length times width equals 273. And again, we have to remove one of our variables. Since L is written in terms of W, we're going to take 3W minus 4, replace the L. We're going to distribute the W. Gives us 3W squared minus 4W equals 273. We'll subtract over the 273, so it's set equal to 0. Now, this problem here would not be advantageous to complete the square because we don't have a 1 in front of our variable being squared. So this would be good to do the quadratic formula, where A is equal to 3, B is equal to the minus 4, which makes it a negative 4, the minus 273, that's going to be my C. Now, to punch this in the calculator, again, you could hit the alpha, y equals, you're going to get a negative b, then it's plus or minus, but we discovered that, well, in our word problems, we can only have positive answers, so we're just going to go with the plus. The square root of 4 squared, notice I didn't put the negative on there, and it's here, because here it's being multiplied to a negative, which will make it a positive. Here, I just want to leave it as 4 because I'm going to square it, which is going to make it positive anyhow. So no reason to put the negative on. Minus 4 times A, which is 3, times C, which is a negative 273, over 2 times A. That's your 2 times 3. We get 10.229. So rounding it to 1 decimal place for that length would be a 10.2. Now, another way to enter this into your calculator, which I think is advantageous, is using that store button like I showed you up here with the L and the W. You can take the 3 stored into alpha A, and I think the calculator set this up for the quadratic formula because right below your alpha button is A, B, and C, all set up and ready to go for the quadratic formula. So 3 stored in A, negative 4 stored in B, and after you hit the A and the B, we got to hit enter so it's activated. And now we're going to have negative 273 stored in C, enter. And what we're going to do is you literally type in the quadratic formula, negative B with just the plus sign, square root of B squared minus 4AC, all over your 2A, and you stored in for, let's see, what were we finding here? Oh, we were finding W. Yep, store it in for W. Notice you get the exact same number. Now we go over here to find our length, which is 3W minus 4. So now my calculator entry is 3 alpha W minus 4. Now it's 26.68, which makes that 26.7. There's my length. There's my width. I have my 2 dimensions measured in feet.